They didn't see his billions beneath the worn jeans and simple t-shirt. All they saw was a black man who didn't belong in their exclusive restaurant. "We don't usually serve people like you here," the waitress muttered with disdain. Marcus Johnson simply nodded and smiled. The morning light streamed through the windows of the Gold Leaf restaurant, illuminating the pristine white tablecloths and polished silverware. In Chicago's bustling financial district, this establishment represented old money and even older attitudes. A man in worn jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and scuffed sneakers pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped inside. Marcus Johnson moved with quiet confidence despite his casual appearance. At 42, his keen eyes missed nothing. Not the hostess's momentary hesitation, not the quick glance between servers, and certainly not the subtle repositioning of other patrons who shifted away as he approached. These reactions weren't new to him. In fact, he was counting on them. "Good morning," he said with a polite smile. "Table for one, please." The hostess, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, looked him up and down. Her smile tightened. "Do you have a reservation?" Marcus glanced around the half-empty restaurant. "I don't believe I need one." After a moment of uncomfortable silence, she grabbed a menu. "Follow me." She led him past empty window tables bathed in sunshine to a small table in the back, near the swinging kitchen doors. As he settled into his chair, Marcus discreetly tapped his smartwatch, activating the recording function, the 48th such recording in his 6-month documentation project on service industry discrimination. "Your server will be with you shortly," the hostess said, dropping the menu on his table before walking away briskly. Marcus opened the leather-bound menu and studied not just the offerings but the environment around him. The walls displayed black and white photographs of Chicago's historical business leaders, all white men in expensive suits. The music, the decor, the very atmosphere spoke of exclusivity. 10 minutes passed. Other customers who arrived after him had already ordered. Marcus sat patiently, observing, taking mental notes for the documentary that would shake the foundations of Chicago's hospitality industry. Finally, a middle-aged woman with fading blonde hair pulled into a tight bun approached his table. Her name tag read Stella. "What can I get you?" she asked, not making eye contact, her pen poised over her notepad with visible reluctance. "Good morning," Marcus replied warmly. "I'd like to start with coffee, please." Stella sighed, barely hiding her annoyance. She leaned closer and spoke in a hushed, cutting tone. "I don't know why they let you in. We don't usually serve people like you here." Marcus maintained his composure, though his heart raced with a familiar mixture of hurt and determination. This was exactly what he had come for. Not the insult, but the documentation of it. As Stella walked away, he discreetly checked his watch to ensure it was recording. What Stella didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Marcus Johnson wasn't just any customer. He was the founder and CEO of Cipher Securities, the nation's largest cybersecurity firm. His net worth exceeded $12 billion. The man they had seated by the kitchen doors owned computing systems that protected the country's most sensitive data, and he was about to change all their lives forever. Stella returned with his coffee, placing it carelessly on the table. A small splash landed on the pristine white tablecloth. "Are you ready to order?" she asked, still avoiding eye contact. "Yes," Marcus said, pointing to the most expensive item on the menu. "I'll have the truffle and gold leaf eggs Benedict, please." She raised an eyebrow but wrote down the order without comment. As she walked away, Marcus noticed a young couple being seated at a nearby table. Both white, both dressed in designer clothes, they were immediately offered mimosas on the house. The contrast wasn't lost on Marcus. It never was. He pulled out his phone and sent a brief text to his assistant, Amira Washington. Location 48. Same patterns. Proceeding as planned. Amira had grown up in the same South Side neighborhood as Marcus. They'd attended the same underfunded public school, faced the same prejudices. But while Marcus had escaped through technology, creating his first security algorithm at 17, Amara had become an activist and community organizer before joining his company. Together, they shared a mission that went beyond business success. "Understood," came her swift reply. "Real estate transaction proceeding. Community center paperwork ready for your signature. Meeting with Mayor Williams confirmed for 2 p.m. Marcus sipped his lukewarm coffee. This was the part that required patience, sitting with the discomfort, documenting the small indignities that accumulated like poisonous drops in a cup. His company had revolutionized data security, but he knew that real security came from social change, from confronting the biases that remained hidden in plain sight. A commotion at the front of the restaurant drew his attention. A tall, silver-haired man in an impeccable suit had entered, and the entire staff seemed to snap to attention. The restaurant's owner, who hadn't been visible before, materialized to shake the man's hand enthusiastically. Marcus recognized him immediately. Richard Whitman, Chicago's most notorious real estate developer. The man whose urban renewal projects had displaced hundreds of families from historically black neighborhoods in the name of progress. The man whose latest project threatened the last remaining community center in South Chicago. The owner led Whitman to a prime table by the window, pulling out his chair with a flourish. "Such an honor to have you with us this morning, Mr. Whitman. Your usual table, of course." Marcus watched the interaction with interest. Another piece of the puzzle was falling into place. In the kitchen doorway, a young black chef peered out, momentarily making eye contact with Marcus. A flicker of recognition crossed his face before he quickly disappeared back into the kitchen. When Stella finally returned with his food, the presentation was a stark contrast to the artfully arranged plates he'd observed going to other tables. His expensive breakfast looked as though it had been hastily thrown together, the hollandaise sauce congealing at the edges. "Enjoy," she said flatly, already turning away. "Thank you," Marcus replied with genuine warmth, causing her to pause for just a moment before continuing on her way. As he ate, Marcus observed the restaurant's dynamics with the keen eye of an anthropologist. The subtle hierarchies, the unspoken rules of belonging, the performance of status. It was all so familiar, yet still painful after all these years and all his success. His watch vibrated with an incoming message from Amara. "First transaction complete. You now own the building." Marcus smiled slightly. The pieces were moving into place. After finishing his meal, Marcus requested more coffee. As Stella reluctantly returned to his table, he noticed the young chef from earlier watching from the kitchen doorway again. This time, the chef approached, wiping his hands on his apron. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Stella. "I'll take care of this table." Stella looked surprised but relinquished the coffee pot with a shrug. As she walked away, the chef turned to Marcus with a careful expression. "I thought that was you," he said quietly. "Marcus Johnson, right? We had Professor Wilson's computer science class together at Chicago State." Marcus studied the young man's face, recognition dawning. "Andre Carter. You were working on a food delivery algorithm." Andre nodded, filling Marcus's cup. "That's right. Dropped out after sophomore year when my mom got sick. Ended up in culinary school instead." He glanced over his shoulder. "Look, man, I'm sorry about the service. If I had known." Marcus subtly raised his hand, stopping Andre mid-sentence. "I'd prefer to keep my identity quiet for now, but I appreciate the coffee." Andre understood immediately. "Got it. But why are you—" He gestured at Marcus's casual clothes and isolated table position. "Research," Marcus replied simply. Andre nodded again, a new understanding passing between them. "They've got me making basic dishes even though I trained in French cuisine. Been here 3 years and still can't get on the main line." He lowered his voice further. "The owner, Mr. Phillips, he talks big about opportunities, but the glass ceiling in this kitchen might as well be concrete." Their conversation was interrupted when the restaurant manager appeared, his face pinched with disapproval. "Andre, back to the kitchen. Now. This isn't social hour." "Yes, sir." Andre gave Marcus a meaningful look before returning to the kitchen. The manager turned to Marcus. "Is there a problem with your service?" "Not at all," Marcus replied calmly. "The chef and I were just catching up. Old classmates." The manager looked skeptical but retreated, keeping a watchful eye on Marcus's table. Across the restaurant, Richard Whitman was holding court at his table, now joined by 2 other businessmen. Their laughter carried across the room as champagne flutes clinked together. Marcus's phone vibrated with another message from Amara. Community Center purchase complete. Legal team has filed protective covenants. It can never be demolished. A waiter passing by Whitman's table spoke loudly enough for Marcus to hear. Mr. Whitman, Mr. Phillips would like to know if you'd care to discuss the South Chicago project over dessert? Perfect timing, Whitman replied. We're finalizing the demolition schedule this week. That old community center is the last obstacle to the new development. Should be quite profitable for all involved. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. Whitman had no idea that his plans had just been permanently derailed. The community center that had given a teenage Marcus a safe place to learn programming would remain standing. As he continued observing, Marcus noticed Stella in conversation with another server near the bar. Their voices carried just enough for him to catch fragments. A third notice this month. Can't make rent again. Aren't you in one of those buildings on Ellis Avenue? Yeah, rent went up 60%. They're calling it neighborhood improvement. That's Whitman's company, isn't it? Stella nodded grimly, glancing at Whitman's table with a mixture of resentment and deference. The pieces connected in Marcus's mind. Stella's prejudice and Whitman's predatory business practices were two sides of the same coin, a system that kept people divided while exploiting them all. It was time for the next phase of his plan. Midday sunlight now streamed directly through the restaurant's tall windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air. The lunch crowd had begun to arrive, creating a steady hum of conversation and clinking silverware. Marcus had been sitting at his table for nearly 2 hours, nursing his coffee and observing the dance of power and privilege around him. The time had come to set the next part of his plan in motion. He signaled to Stella, who approached with visible reluctance. "I'd like the check, please," he said with a polite nod. "Finally," she muttered under her breath, pulling the bill from her apron pocket and placing it on the table. Marcus reached into his jeans pocket and extracted a sleek metal wallet. As he opened it, he deliberately fumbled, sending his credit card skittering across the white tablecloth and onto the floor near Stella's feet. It wasn't just any credit card. It was the Obsidian Reserve, a solid black titanium card with no spending limit, issued by invitation only to individuals with assets exceeding $1 billion. Only a few hundred existed in the entire world. Stella bent to retrieve it, her eyes widening as she registered the weight and design of the card. For a moment, confusion crossed her face. Then her expression hardened into suspicion. "Is this some kind of joke?" she asked, holding the card between her fingertips as if it might be contaminated. "No joke," Marcus replied calmly. "Just my credit card." "Right," Stella said with a dismissive snort. "And I'm the Queen of England." She turned toward the manager's station. "Jeff, we might have a situation here." The manager approached quickly, his eyes darting between Marcus and the card in Stella's hand. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, his tone professionally neutral but with an undercurrent of suspicion. "This gentleman is trying to pay with this," Stella explained, handing over the obsidian card. "Obviously fake." The manager examined the card carefully, turning it over in his hands. The lack of expiration date or CVV number, standard features of the exclusive Obsidian, seemed to confirm his suspicions. "Sir, we take fraud very seriously at Goldleaf," he said with forced politeness. "I'll need to see some identification." Marcus calmly retrieved his driver's license from his wallet and handed it over. The license showed only his name and address, a modest condo he kept in the city rather than his primary Lakeshore Drive penthouse. The manager scrutinized the ID, then the card, then Marcus himself. "This doesn't prove this card is legitimate." "Feel free to run it," Marcus suggested. "The name should match." The manager's jaw tightened. "I'll do that." He pulled out the restaurant's payment terminal and swiped the card. His eyebrows rose involuntarily when the terminal immediately recognized the card and displayed Obsidian Reserve on its screen. Still suspicious, he called the verification number on the back of the terminal. "Yes, hello. I need to verify an Obsidian Reserve card," he said, his voice carrying across the now quieter restaurant. Several nearby diners had turned to watch the unfolding drama. "The name is Marcus Johnson." As he listened to the response, the manager's expression shifted from skepticism to confusion to the beginning of alarm. Yes, I understand. No, everything is fine. Just a routine verification. Thank you. He disconnected the call and stared at the card in his hand as if it had suddenly transformed into something dangerous. Is there a problem? Marcus asked innocently. No, sir, the manager replied, his tone now obsequious. The card is verified. He handed it back to Marcus with noticeably more care than before. Will there be anything else today, Mr. Johnson? Actually, yes, Marcus said. I'd like to speak with the owner, Mr. Phillips. I have a business proposition that might interest him. The manager hesitated only briefly. Of course, I'll see if he's available. As the manager hurried away, Stella remained standing by the table, her face a complex mixture of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and the dawning realization that she might have made a terrible mistake. Your bill comes to $127.42, she said, her voice suddenly much softer. Thank you, Marcus replied. He inserted his card into the payment terminal she provided, added a $200 tip, and signed his name with a flourish. Stella's eyes widened when she saw the gratuity amount. Sir, You don't need to. It's fine, Marcus interrupted gently. Everyone deserves a living wage, regardless of circumstances. Her hands trembled slightly as she processed the payment. The terminal printed the receipt, which she placed on the table without making eye contact. Marcus could see the questions forming in her mind. Who was he really? Why had he sat through her poor service without complaint? And most importantly, what was he going to do now? The restaurant's atmosphere had shifted perceptibly. Word had spread among the staff about the mysterious man in casual clothes with the obsidian card. Servers who had previously ignored Marcus now glanced his way with nervous curiosity. The hostess who had seated him by the kitchen hovered nearby, straightening already perfect place settings. After a few minutes, a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver temples and an expensive charcoal suit approached the table. Edward Phillips, owner of the Gold Leaf restaurant, had a reputation for charm and shrewd business sense. His smile appeared genuine, though his eyes were calculating as he extended his hand. Mr. Johnson, what a pleasure. I'm Edward Phillips. I understand you wanted to speak with me? Marcus stood and shook his hand firmly. Thank you for making time, Mr. Phillips. I've been enjoying your restaurant this morning. Phillips gestured to the chair across from Marcus. May I? And please call me Edward. Of course, Edward. And I'm Marcus. Phillips sat down, smoothing his tie. I must apologize if there was any misunderstanding earlier. We pride ourselves on impeccable service at Gold Leaf. Do you? Marcus asked mildly, taking a sip of his water. A flicker of unease crossed Philip's face, quickly replaced by his professional smile. Absolutely. Which is why I'd like to personally ensure your experience with us ends positively. He gestured discreetly, and a server immediately appeared with 2 glasses of champagne. On the house, of course. Marcus accepted the glass but didn't drink. Thank you. I mentioned a business proposition. Phillips leaned forward eagerly. Yes, my manager mentioned that. Are you looking for an event space, perhaps? Gold Leaf has a private dining room that can accommodate up to 50 guests. Many prestigious companies hold their executive dinners here. Actually, Marcus said, I represent a group interested in corporate dining options on a larger scale. We're evaluating potential partners for our executive meal program across multiple cities. Philip's eyes lit up with undisguised interest. That sounds like an excellent opportunity. Gold Leaf has sister restaurants in New York, San Francisco, and Boston. We could easily accommodate a national corporate account. That's good to know. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Our annual food and beverage budget exceeds $8 million. Phillips nearly choked on his champagne. I see. Well, we would be delighted to discuss a customized program for your... Which company did you say you represent? I didn't, Marcus replied with a small smile. But before we get into those details, I'm curious about something. He gestured around the restaurant. I notice a certain atmosphere here. Very traditional. Very exclusive. Phillips straightened proudly. Gold Leaf caters to Chicago's elite business community. We've been serving the city's most distinguished leaders for over 30 years. And how would you describe your hiring practices? Marcus asked. I couldn't help but notice certain patterns in your staff. Philip's smile tightened slightly. We hire only the most qualified individuals with extensive fine dining experience. I see. Marcus nodded. And your chef, Andre Carter, he seems quite talented. Yet he mentioned he's been kept on basic stations despite his French culinary training. Staff assignments are based on many factors, Phillips replied stiffly. Experience, performance, fit with our establishment's standards. Standards, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. Interesting word. An awkward silence fell between them. Phillips broke it with forced cheerfulness. Perhaps we should discuss your corporate dining needs in more detail. I'd be happy to prepare a detailed proposal. That won't be necessary yet, Marcus said. First, I'd like to speak with your friend, Mr. Whitman. I believe we have some mutual interest to discuss. Phillips looked surprised but quickly recovered. Richard, of course, let me introduce you. He stood and gestured toward Whitman's table by the window. As they walked across the restaurant, Marcus noticed Stella watching them with undisguised astonishment. Andre had emerged from the kitchen again and stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing hope. Richard Whitman looked up from his business lunch, his expression questioning as Phillips approached with Marcus. Richard, may I introduce Marcus Johnson? He represents a significant corporate account and expressed interest in meeting you. Whitman stood and extended his hand, studying Marcus with thinly veiled skepticism. Richard Whitman, Whitman Development. I don't believe we've met, though your name sounds familiar. We haven't, Marcus confirmed, shaking his hand. But I'm familiar with your work, particularly your recent projects in South Chicago. Whitman's expression brightened. Ah, an investor? We're always open to new partnership opportunities. The South Chicago Renewal Project is moving forward rapidly. In fact, we're finalizing demolition plans this week for the last remaining obstacle, an outdated community center that's been holding up progress for months. Is that so? Marcus asked. Fascinating timing. I actually just completed a real estate transaction myself this morning. Oh? Whitman raised an eyebrow, his interest clearly piqued despite his continuing skepticism about Marcus's appearance. Anything I might know about? Marcus smiled. Almost certainly. Before he could elaborate, his phone rang loudly. The automated voice notification echoed across the suddenly quiet restaurant. Breaking news alert. Cipher Securities stock drops 5% following rumors that founder and CEO Marcus Johnson may step down to pursue political office. Every head in the restaurant turned toward him. Whitman's eyes widened in shock as recognition finally dawned. You're that Marcus Johnson, the cybersecurity billionaire? Phillips had gone pale. Cipher Securities? But why would you? Marcus silenced his phone calmly. Gentlemen, I believe we have much more to discuss than we initially thought. The restaurant had fallen into a hushed silence. At nearby tables, diners stared openly, some discreetly taking photos with their phones. The Gold Leaf's most prestigious patrons had just discovered they were dining in the presence of one of the country's most influential tech billionaires, and he was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, seated at a back table by the kitchen. Richard Whitman recovered first, his expression morphing from shock to opportunistic delight. Marcus Johnson, what an unexpected pleasure. Please join us. He gestured expansively to his table. We were just discussing exciting development opportunities. Edward Phillips stood frozen, his face ashen. Mr. Johnson, we had no idea. If there's been any misunderstanding today. There's been no misunderstanding, Marcus interrupted calmly. Your staff and establishment treated me exactly as you would treat anyone who looks like me and dresses as I do today. He turned to Whitman. As for your kind invitation, I'm afraid I must decline. I've actually finished my meal and was about to leave. But surely we could schedule a meeting, Whitman pressed, reaching into his jacket for a business card. My development company and your technology empire could create remarkable synergies. Marcus smiled politely but made no move to accept the card. I'm quite selective about my business partnerships, Mr. Whitman. I prefer companies that build communities rather than displace them. Whitman's smile faltered. I think you misunderstand the nature of urban renewal. I understand it perfectly, Marcus replied. Which brings me to those real estate transactions I mentioned. He turned to include Phillips in the conversation. Mr. Phillips, are you aware that the building housing this restaurant was recently sold? Phillips blinked in confusion. That's impossible. I have a long-term lease with Lakefront Properties. There's been no notice of... Lakefront Properties agreed to sell the building this morning, Marcus explained. The new owner took possession approximately 45 minutes ago. What new owner? Phillips demanded, his composure cracking. Marcus smiled. Me. The silence in the restaurant deepened. At the bar, a glass slipped from a bartender's hand and shattered on the floor. No one moved to clean it up. That's... Phillips struggled to form words. That's not possible. You can't just... I assure you, it's done, Marcus said. The paperwork was finalized while I enjoyed my breakfast. He turned to Whitman. And as for the South Chicago Community Center, that property has also changed hands this morning. Whitman's face darkened. What are you saying? I'm saying that the community center will not be demolished. In fact, it's being placed in a permanent trust with ironclad protections against future development. The children of South Chicago will continue to have a safe place to learn and grow for generations to come. Whitman's expression transformed from confusion to anger. You can't do that. We have development rights, contracts with the city, millions invested in planning. Your contracts were contingent on acquiring all properties in the designated zone, Marcus explained calmly. With the community center permanently protected, your project, as designed, cannot proceed. The businessman's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is outrageous. I'll sue. You're welcome to try, Marcus replied mildly. My legal team has ensured everything is quite airtight. They're very good at what they do. Phillips had sunk into a nearby chair, his face a mask of shock. Why? Why would you do this? Why come here like this? He gestured vaguely at Marcus's casual attire. Marcus's expression remained calm, but his eyes held a new intensity. Because some truths can only be discovered when people don't know who you are. When they think you're nobody important, they show you who they really are. He turned to look directly at Stella, who stood frozen near the bar, watching the scene unfold with undisguised horror. Sometimes people need to see the consequences of their small cruelties and prejudices. Not for revenge, but for transformation. The restaurant remained eerily silent as Marcus turned back to Phillips. As the new owner of this building, I'll be making some changes to the lease terms. We can discuss those at a later date. For now, I have a meeting with Mayor Williams this afternoon to discuss new anti-discrimination policies for Chicago's hospitality industry. Phillips found his voice at last. You're going to shut us down, aren't you? This is all some elaborate revenge scheme. Marcus shook his head. No, Mr. Phillips, this isn't about revenge. It's about change. He glanced around the restaurant. Gold Leaf will remain open, but with new policies. Equal hiring practices, bias training for all staff, community outreach programs, and a new executive chef who will be given free rein to showcase his considerable talents. Andre, still watching from the kitchen doorway, straightened in surprise. You can't just force us to... Phillips began. I'm not forcing anything, Marcus interrupted. I'm offering an opportunity. Adapt and grow, or find another location when your lease expires in 90 days. The choice is yours. Marcus checked his watch and nodded politely to both men. Gentlemen, it's been enlightening, but I have other appointments. I'll have my team contact you both tomorrow to discuss next steps. As he turned to leave, Stella stepped forward, her face pale. Mr. Johnson, about what I said earlier. Marcus paused, studying her face carefully. Ms. Mills, Stella Mills. Ms. Mills, I understand you're facing eviction due to rent increases in one of Mr. Whitman's properties. Stella's eyes widened in shock. How did you? I pay attention, Marcus said simply. You might be interested to know that as part of today's real estate transactions, several apartment buildings on Ellis Avenue were also purchased. Rents will be returned to 2022 levels effective immediately, with a 5-year freeze on increases. Tears welled in Stella's eyes as the full impact of his words registered. Why would you do that? After how I treated you, because systemic problems require systemic solutions, Marcus replied. Your prejudice and your housing insecurity are connected parts of the same broken system. Addressing one without the other solves nothing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. Not the glossy corporate kind, but a simple one with just a phone number. This is my assistant, Amara Washington. Call her tomorrow. We're always looking for people who understand how power and privilege really work in this city. Sometimes the hardest lessons create the most valuable perspectives. Stella took the card with trembling fingers as Marcus nodded once more to the assembled group and walked calmly toward the exit. As he reached the door, Andre called out, "Mr. Johnson." Marcus turned. Andre stood tall, no longer hiding in the kitchen doorway. He raised his fist slightly, a subtle gesture of solidarity and respect. Marcus returned the gesture with a small smile before stepping out into the bright Chicago afternoon, leaving behind a restaurant forever changed by his visit. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Chicago's civic buildings as Marcus's driver navigated through downtown traffic. Having changed into a tailored charcoal suit for his meeting with the mayor, Marcus reviewed the morning's events with Amara via the car's secure communication system. The community center paperwork is finalized, Amara confirmed. The trust is ironclad. No developer can touch it now. And the Ellis Avenue apartment buildings are officially under our management company. We've already notified residents about the rent reductions. Good, Marcus nodded. And the restaurant building? All complete. Phillips has 90 days to agree to our new lease terms or find another location. Marcus gazed out the window, watching the city pass by. What do you think he'll do? Based on his financial statements, he can't afford to relocate, Amar replied. He'll fight it initially, then come around when he realizes we're serious. The car pulled up to City Hall, where a staff member was already waiting to escort Marcus inside. The contrast to his morning reception couldn't have been more striking. Now, dressed in his usual business attire, doors opened automatically for him. People smiled, offered assistance, treated him with deference. "Mr. Johnson, the mayor is expecting you," the aide said, leading him through security with expedited clearance. "He's very excited about your proposal." Mayor Thomas Williams rose from behind his desk as Marcus entered, extending his hand with a broad smile. At 58, Williams had built his political career on promises of economic development and opportunity for all Chicagoans, promises that his close relationships with developers like Whitman often undermined. "Marcus, great to see you," the mayor said warmly. "I've been intrigued ever since your team requested this meeting. Something about a new initiative for the hospitality industry?" Marcus took a seat across from the mayor. "That's right. But before we get to that, I'd like to discuss the South Chicago Community Center." The mayor's smile dimmed slightly. "Ah, yes. Unfortunate situation. Progress requires difficult choices sometimes, but I assure you the new development will create hundreds of jobs." "The community center will not be demolished," Marcus interrupted calmly. "I've purchased the property and placed it in a protected trust." Williams blinked in surprise. "You? What?" "But the development plan was approved months ago. Whitman will need to revise his plans," Marcus stated firmly. "The community center stays." The mayor leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with new calculation in his eyes. "I see. That's unexpected. Richard won't be pleased." "Richard's pleasure isn't my concern," Marcus replied. "The well-being of South Chicago residents is. That center provides essential services to hundreds of families, including after-school programming that keeps kids safe and engaged." Williams sighed. "Marcus, I understand your attachment to the community. Your foundation does admirable work, but you have to understand the economic realities. The city needs tax revenue. Development brings jobs. Development often displaces the very people who need those jobs," Marcus countered. "But we're not here to debate that point. The community center is now protected. What we're here to discuss is how to move forward constructively." He removed a tablet from his briefcase and slid it across the desk. "This is a proposal for a new Chicago Hospitality Standards Initiative. It would establish clear anti-discrimination guidelines for all restaurants, hotels, and entertainment venues in the city, regular compliance testing, mandatory bias training, real consequences for violations. The mayor skimmed the document, his expression growing more concerned with each swipe. This is extensive. The industry will push back hard. They'll claim it's overregulation, added costs during challenging economic times. They'll adapt, Marcus said confidently. And to ease the transition, my foundation will cover implementation costs for the first 3 years. All the city needs to provide is the regulatory framework and enforcement. Williams looked up sharply. That's a significant commitment. We're talking millions of dollars. $27 million to be precise, Marcus confirmed. A worthwhile investment in a more equitable city. The mayor set down the tablet and steepled his fingers. Why this? Why now? You've always focused on technology education, scholarship programs. This seems personal. Marcus considered his response carefully. This morning, I conducted an experiment. I visited the Gold Leaf restaurant dressed in casual clothes, presenting myself as an ordinary black man rather than a billionaire CEO. He recounted the experience in detail. The table by the kitchen, Stella's cutting remark, the stark contrasts in service. As he spoke, the mayor's expression shifted from surprised to disturbed to genuinely troubled. That's unfortunate, Williams said when Marcus finished. But surely one bad experience doesn't justify a citywide initiative of this magnitude. It wasn't one experience, Marcus corrected him. It was the 48th such test I've conducted over 6 months. I have video documentation from each establishment, showing consistent patterns of discrimination based on race, apparent socioeconomic status, or both. The mayor paled slightly. Video documentation? Complete with timestamp verification and location data, Marcus confirmed. My team has compiled it into a rather compelling documentary. We're prepared to release it next month, with or without this initiative in place. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Mayor Williams was many things, but politically naive wasn't one of them. He understood immediately what such a documentary would mean for Chicago's reputation, and for his administration. You're putting me in a difficult position, Marcus. I'm offering you an opportunity, Marcus countered, to be the mayor who took concrete action against discrimination in Chicago, to create a model program that cities nationwide will emulate. He leaned forward. To do the right thing, Tom. Williams drummed his fingers on his desk, his political mind clearly calculating angles and implications. Finally, he sighed. I'll need to make some calls, get feedback from key stakeholders. Of course, Marcus agreed, but I'd like a preliminary commitment today, a public statement of intent, at minimum. The mayor studied him for a long moment. You really care about this, don't you? It's not just business or publicity. It never has been, Marcus said quietly. Technology can transform systems, but only if everyone has equal access to those systems. What good is creating security software if people aren't secure in their basic dignity? Williams nodded slowly. I'll make a statement this evening. Draft legislation within 2 weeks. But I want your continued input and financial support throughout implementation. You'll have both, Marcus promised, rising to his feet. My team will be in touch tomorrow with detailed proposals. As they shook hands, the mayor held on a moment longer than necessary. You know, you could do more from this side of the desk. Have you considered running for office yourself? Marcus smiled. One impossible task at a time, Mr. Mayor. As Marcus's car pulled away from City Hall, his phone buzzed with a notification. A major business news outlet had just published an article. Tech billionaire Marcus Johnson rumored to be considering political run. The stock price of Cipher Securities had dropped another 2 percentage points. Should we issue a denial? Amara asked when he called her. Not yet, Marcus replied. Let's see how things play out first. How are we doing with the Gold Leaf situation? Interesting developments, Amara said. Phillips has been calling every 15 minutes. He's moved from angry to bargaining. And that waitress, Stella Mills, she left 3 messages asking if the job offer was serious. It was, Marcus confirmed. Set up an interview for next week. I think she might bring a valuable perspective to our community relations team. And Andre Carter. Offer him the executive chef position at Goldleaf with full creative control over the menu. If Phillips objects, remind him of the lease terms. The car turned onto Michigan Avenue, passing gleaming storefronts where Marcus had occasionally been followed by suspicious security guards despite his wealth. The city was beautiful and brutal, welcoming and exclusive all at once. One more thing, he said to Amara. Contact our real estate division. I want to know how many other properties Whitman owns in predominantly black neighborhoods and what it would cost to acquire them all. All of them? Amara sounded surprised. That would be hundreds of millions at least. Start with the residential buildings, Marcus clarified. Focus on properties where tenants have reported excessive rent increases or maintenance issues in the last 2 years. As they disconnected, Marcus's thoughts turned to the documentary project. The footage from today would be the culmination, not just documenting discrimination but showing a path forward, transformation rather than mere exposure. His phone rang again. The screen displayed Edward Phillips, Gold Leaf Restaurant. Marcus Johnson, he answered calmly. Mr. Johnson. Phillips' voice carried a strained politeness. I've been considering our conversation earlier today. Perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. Perhaps, Marcus agreed neutrally. I wanted to assure you that Goldleaf has always been committed to excellence and inclusion. Phillips continued. If there were any misunderstandings today, I sincerely apologize. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Mr. Phillips. It was policy, perhaps unwritten, but policy nonetheless. Phillips sighed audibly. What exactly do you want from us? I already told you, Marcus replied. Equal hiring practices, bias training, community outreach, and Andre Carter as executive chef. He's barely 30. He doesn't have the experience to... He has a culinary degree and 3 years at your restaurant during which you've refused to promote him despite his qualifications. Marcus interrupted. That ends now. A long silence followed. And if I agree to these terms, what then? Then Goldleaf becomes a model for the initiative the mayor will announce this evening. Your restaurant will be featured positively in the documentary, showing how institutions can evolve. Your lease will be renewed at favorable terms. Another silence, longer this time. I'll need some time to consider. Take all the time you need, Marcus said, until tomorrow morning. As he ended the call, the car pulled up to the gleaming skyscraper housing Cipher Security's Chicago headquarters. Employees nodded respectfully as he entered, but Marcus barely noticed. His mind was already racing ahead to the next phase of his plan. In his penthouse office overlooking the city, Marcus found Amara waiting with a stack of documents. The mayor's office just sent over their draft statement, she said, handing him a tablet. They're moving faster than I expected. Marcus skimmed the document. He knows what's at stake. His re-election campaign starts in 3 months. And these just came in from legal, Amara continued, indicating the papers on his desk. Preliminary contracts for the Ellis Avenue buildings. We can begin tenant notifications tomorrow. Marcus signed the documents without hesitation. Make sure they understand this isn't temporary. The rent controls are permanent. Amara studied him with a mixture of admiration and concern. You know, when we started this project 6 months ago, I thought it was just about documenting problems. I didn't realize you were planning to solve them all personally. Marcus smiled slightly. Not all of them, just enough to create momentum for change. He looked out at the city sprawling beneath them. Systemic problems require systemic solutions, but systems are changed one decision at a time. His computer chimed with an incoming video call from Malik Johnson, Marcus's younger brother and head of the Johnson Foundation. Hey, big brother, Malik greeted him as the screen lit up. I hear you've been busy today, buying buildings, terrorizing restaurant owners, meeting with mayors. Just an average Tuesday for you? Marcus laughed. Something like that. How are things at the foundation? Interesting, actually. We've had calls from 3 restaurant groups wanting to proactively participate in anti-bias training programs. Word travels fast. Faster than I expected, Marcus admitted. Did they mention why the sudden interest? Malik grinned. Apparently, there's a rumor that a certain tech billionaire is conducting undercover tests of service quality. Nobody wants to be the next gold leaf. Good, Marcus nodded. Fear of consequences can motivate initial change, but for it to last, they need to see the benefits. Which is where the foundation comes in, Malik agreed. We're already designing the training program. Diverse trainers, practical scenarios, measurable outcomes. No corporate checkbox diversity nonsense. Perfect, Marcus said. Keep me updated. As they disconnected, Marcus leaned back in his chair, feeling a rare moment of satisfaction. The experiment had worked better than anticipated. Ripples were becoming waves. His phone buzzed with a text from Andre Carter. Mr. Phillips just offered me executive chef position. Said it was his idea. Should I accept? Marcus smiled and replied, Congratulations, you've earned it. Make the most of it. Another notification appeared. Mayor Williams was scheduled to make his announcement in 1 hour. The pieces were falling into place faster than Marcus had dared to hope. Yet he knew from bitter experience that progress was never linear, and resistance often followed initial success. The real challenges were still to come. The following morning, Marcus woke to discover that Richard Whitman had not taken yesterday's events lying down. The real estate developer had called a press conference, presenting himself as a victim of corporate bullying by tech billionaire Marcus Johnson. This unprecedented hostile takeover of community development projects threatens thousands of jobs and millions in tax revenue, Whitman declared to assembled reporters. While Mr. Johnson plays social justice warrior with his billions, real Chicagoans will suffer the consequences of his interference. Marcus watched the coverage on his living room television, sipping coffee calmly. Amara called moments later. Have you seen it? She asked without preamble. I'm watching now, Marcus confirmed. Predictable response. He's calling for the mayor to honor the original development agreements. Says he has contracts that can't legally be broken. Let him try, Marcus replied. Our legal team has verified that the community center purchase invalidates his master development plan. He'll need city approval for any revised plans, which the mayor won't grant after yesterday's announcement, Amara concluded. Still, Whitman has a lot of allies in Chicago business. Some of them are on our board. Marcus had anticipated this challenge. Schedule a board meeting for tomorrow. I'll address their concerns directly. After disconnecting, Marcus continued watching as a reporter asked Whitman about allegations that his development projects had displaced hundreds of lower-income residents. Urban renewal always involves transition, Whitman responded smoothly, but we provide relocation assistance and create better housing options in the long run. These neighborhoods need investment, not preservation of outdated facilities. The doorbell rang, interrupting the broadcast. Marcus was surprised to find Stella Mills standing nervously in his hallway when he opened the door. She had traded her waitress uniform for a modest business casual outfit, clutching a portfolio case tightly. Ms. Mills, Marcus said, our meeting isn't until tomorrow. I know, she replied, her voice tense but determined. But I needed to speak with you today. It's important. Marcus studied her for a moment, then stepped aside. Come in. Stella entered the penthouse, her eyes widening as she took in the space. Minimalist modern design with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. African artwork and framed technological patents created an interesting juxtaposition on the walls. Would you like coffee? Marcus offered. No, thank you, Stella replied, still standing awkwardly in the entryway. I won't take much of your time. Marcus gestured toward the living area. Please, sit. Stella perched on the edge of a leather sofa, placing her portfolio on the coffee table. I came because of what Whitman is saying on the news. It's not true, and I have proof. Marcus's interest sharpened. What kind of proof? She opened the portfolio and removed a stack of documents. 5 years ago, I was a paralegal at the law firm that handled Whitman's tenant agreements. I left when I realized what was happening, but I kept copies of certain documents. She spread the papers across the table. These are the original relocation agreements Whitman offered tenants in the West Side development. And these, she pointed to another set of documents, are what they actually received. The differences were never disclosed. Marcus examined the papers carefully. The discrepancies were significant. Promised relocation assistance had been reduced by 60%. Right of return clauses had been eliminated, and rent increase protections had been shortened from 5 years to 6 months. "Why are you showing me this?" Marcus asked, looking up at Stella. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap. "Because yesterday you said systemic problems require systemic solutions. You were right, and—" She hesitated. "Because I owe you an apology." Marcus waited silently, giving her space to continue. "What I said to you at the restaurant, there's no excuse for it. But I want you to understand." Her voice grew firmer. "I lost my home because of Whitman's practices. I went from having a career to waiting tables. I've been angry for years, and I took that anger out on people who didn't deserve it." She gestured at the documents. "Whitman destroyed my neighborhood, my career, and then had the nerve to come sit in my section at Goldleaf and leave $20 tips like he was some kind of savior. And now you want revenge," Marcus suggested. Stella shook her head. "No, I want justice. There's a difference." Marcus studied her thoughtfully. The woman before him now was markedly different from the bitter waitress of yesterday. There was a clarity in her eyes, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. "These documents could be very useful," he acknowledged, "but you should know that providing them might expose you to legal risk, confidentiality agreements, possibly accusations of theft." "I know," she said steadily. "I'm prepared for that." "Why now? You've had these for years." Stella looked down at her hands. "Because until yesterday, I didn't believe anything could change. People like Whitman always won. People like me always lost." She looked up with newfound determination. "You showed me that doesn't have to be true." Marcus nodded slowly. "Thank you for bringing these to me. My legal team will review them immediately." He picked up his phone and sent a quick text. "They'll want to interview you about each document." "Of course," Stella agreed. As she gathered the papers back into her portfolio, she added, "About the job you mentioned. I understand if that offer is no longer open." "Why wouldn't it be? After what I said to you, how I treated you." Marcus smiled slightly. "Ms. Mills, if I only hired people who had never made mistakes, I'd have no employees at all. What matters is what we learn from those mistakes." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you. I won't let you down." As she rose to leave, Marcus added, "One more thing. Would you be willing to share your story in the documentary we're producing? Your perspective as both a victim of gentrification and a participant in the service industry would be valuable." Stella hesitated only briefly before nodding. "If it will help change things, yes." After she left, Marcus immediately called Amara to brief her on this unexpected development. "Stella Mills just dropped a potential bombshell in our laps. Documents showing Whitman's company systematically misled tenants in previous developments." "That could change everything," Amara replied. "If we can verify them, we could approach the Attorney General's office." "Exactly. Have legal start the verification process immediately, and add Stella to the documentary interview schedule." "Already done," Amara confirmed. "Oh, and Phillips called again. He's accepting all our terms for Goldleaf. Andre starts as executive chef next week." Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. "Good. Now let's prepare for Whitman's next move. He won't go down without a fight." As if on cue, his phone buzzed with a news alert. "Developer Richard Whitman calls for congressional investigation into tech monopolies, cites Marcus Johnson's alarming power consolidation." The battle was escalating exactly as Marcus had anticipated. But now, thanks to Stella's unexpected alliance, they had a new weapon in their arsenal. The Cipher Securities boardroom occupied the entire 87th floor of their headquarters, with panoramic views of Chicago serving as a backdrop to the power assembled around the massive table. 14 board members, among the most influential leaders in technology, finance, and industry, had gathered for the emergency meeting. Marcus sat at the head of the table, Amara at his right hand. The atmosphere was tense as Board Chairman Howard Reynolds called the meeting to order. "I think we all know why we're here," Reynolds began, his silver hair and aristocratic bearing projecting authority. Recent actions by our CEO have raised concerns about company focus and resource allocation. Richard Whitman's calls for congressional investigations have already impacted our stock price. Several board members nodded in agreement. Jennifer Chen, representing a major investment fund, leaned forward. Marcus, we've always supported your philanthropic initiatives, but this appears to be something different. Using company resources for what seems to be a personal crusade raises governance questions. Marcus listened calmly as several others voiced similar concerns. When they finished, he stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city before turning back to face them. When I founded this company 15 years ago, our mission statement included a commitment to creating security in all its forms. Digital security, yes, but also the security that comes from being treated with dignity, from having stable housing, from knowing your children have safe places to learn and grow. He returned to the table and activated the room's display system. Images appeared on the wall screens: the South Chicago Community Center, the Gold Leaf Restaurant, the Ellis Avenue Apartments. What you're seeing are not separate initiatives or distractions from our core business. They're extensions of it. He brought up the next slide, a map of Chicago with dozens of properties highlighted. These are all Whitman development properties in predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, areas where residents are being systematically displaced to make way for luxury developments. Howard Reynolds frowned. Marcus, while that may be concerning, it's hardly our company's responsibility to— It becomes our responsibility, Marcus interrupted, when those same residents are then denied service at establishments like Gold Leaf, when they're excluded from the very neighborhoods they helped build, when the digital security we provide means nothing because their physical and economic security is constantly under threat. He nodded to Amara, who distributed folders to each board member. What you're receiving are verified documents provided by a former employee of Whitman's legal team. They show a pattern of systematically misleading tenants about their relocation rights. The board members leafed through the documents with growing expressions of concern. Lawrence Washington, the board's most senior member, looked up with a troubled expression. If these are authentic, they could constitute fraud. They're authentic, Marcus confirmed. Our legal team has verified them, and the Attorney General's office is now reviewing the evidence. Marcus activated another display, the full financial analysis of his recent property acquisitions. Now, to address concerns about resource allocation, these investments represent less than 0.8% of our cash reserves. They're structured as separate transactions through my personal holdings, not corporate assets. And most importantly, they're already showing positive returns. He highlighted several figures on the screen. Tenant retention at the Ellis Avenue properties has increased 38% since we lowered rents to sustainable levels. Maintenance costs have decreased by 22% as residents take greater ownership in a building where they can afford to stay long-term. The Gold Leaf Restaurant has seen a 15% increase in reservations since the announcement of its new inclusive policies and executive chef. Jennifer Chen studied the figures with newfound interest. You're suggesting these aren't just social impact investments, but financially sound ones. I'm demonstrating that ethics and economics aren't opposing forces, Marcus replied. When we create more inclusive systems, we expand markets, foster innovation, and build sustainable growth. Board member Rajiv Patel, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. I've been concerned about our limited growth in certain urban markets for years. If these projects can serve as proofs of concept for a more inclusive business model, they could open significant new customer segments. Marcus nodded. Exactly. This isn't charity. It's strategy. The conversation continued for another hour as Marcus addressed each concern in detail. Gradually, the mood in the room shifted from skepticism to cautious support. Howard Reynolds finally called for a vote on a resolution of confidence in Marcus's leadership. It passed 12-2. As the meeting concluded, Reynolds approached Marcus privately. "You walked a fine line today," he said. You convince them this is good business, not just good ethics. It's both, Marcus replied simply. Whitman won't back down easily, Reynolds warned. He has friends in Washington. This congressional investigation threat could become real. I'm counting on it, Marcus said with a slight smile. Some conversations need a bigger stage. After the board members departed, Amara stayed behind. That went better than expected. They're business people, Marcus replied. They understand numbers. Speaking of which, what's the status on the documentary release? Final edits are complete, Amara confirmed. We can release it whenever you're ready. Marcus considered for a moment. Hold until after the congressional hearing if it materializes. The timing needs to be perfect. His phone buzzed with a text from Andre. First night as executive chef. Full house. Come see what we've done with the place. Good news? Amara asked, noting his smile. Progress, Marcus replied. One small piece at a time. As they left the boardroom, Marcus's thoughts returned to the community center where his own journey had begun. As a teenager, it had provided him his first computer, his first programming lessons, his first glimpse of possibilities beyond the limitations others tried to impose on him. Now, it would continue to do the same for new generations, not as an act of charity, but as an essential piece of infrastructure for a more equitable future. The board had seen his actions as a strategy for market expansion. They weren't wrong, but they hadn't grasped the full picture. Marcus wasn't just trying to change Goldleaf or Whitman Development or even Chicago. He was changing the fundamental equations of power, one variable at a time. The high-ceilinged chamber of the House Committee on Technology and Economic Development buzzed with anticipation. Journalists packed the press section, cameras positioned to capture every moment of what promised to be explosive testimony. Marcus sat calmly at the witness table, a solitary figure facing the semicircle of representatives elevated before him. Behind him, the gallery was filled with spectators, including Amara, Andre, Stella, and many others whose lives had intersected with his mission. Committee Chair Congressman William Foster gavelled the session to order. This hearing will come to order. Today, we examine allegations of improper market influence by technology leaders, specifically focusing on recent actions by Marcus Johnson, CEO of Cipher Securities. Foster, a longtime ally of development interests, continued with barely disguised hostility. Mr. Johnson, your company controls critical cybersecurity infrastructure while you personally engage in seemingly unrelated business activities. Recent acquisitions in Chicago real estate markets have raised concerns about concentration of power and potential conflicts of interest. Marcus leaned toward the microphone. Thank you for the opportunity to address these concerns, Congressman. Please explain how your company's dominant position in cybersecurity relates to your sudden interest in community centers and restaurants, Foster demanded. They relate directly to our core mission, Marcus replied evenly. Cipher Securities was founded on the principle that security extends beyond digital protection. When residents lose their homes to predatory development, when individuals face discrimination in public accommodations, their security is compromised just as surely as if their data were breached. Congresswoman Eleanor Diaz, representing a Chicago district, pressed further. Mr. Johnson, while your intentions may be admirable, many are concerned about the concentration of power when tech billionaires can unilaterally reshape city neighborhoods. What gives you the right to make these decisions for communities? It was a fair question, one Marcus had often asked himself. I don't make decisions for communities, Congresswoman. I create conditions where communities can make their own decisions. The South Chicago Community Center is now structured as a resident-governed trust. The Ellis Avenue Apartments have tenant representation on their management board. Richard Whitman sat in the front row of the gallery, his expression darkening as Marcus continued. As for concentration of power, Marcus added, I would suggest this committee examine the development contracts that previously consolidated entire neighborhoods under single corporate control, with no community input whatsoever. Congressman James Wilson, a fierce critic of big tech, leaned forward. Mr. Johnson, documents submitted to this committee show your company has been conducting some kind of covert testing operation in Chicago restaurants. Can you explain the purpose of this surveillance program? Marcus had anticipated this question. It wasn't surveillance, Congressman. It was documentation of a persistent pattern of discrimination that traditional enforcement mechanisms have failed to address. He nodded to his legal team, who distributed packages to each committee member. What you're receiving is a summary of our findings across 48 Chicago establishments. Each instance is documented with time-stamped video and audio recordings showing differential treatment based solely on appearance and perceived status. The committee members began reviewing the materials with growing discomfort. The evidence was irrefutable. Side-by-side comparisons showing stark differences in service, seating, and treatment. Congresswoman Diaz looked up, visibly moved. Mr. Johnson, these instances are deeply troubling, but why take such unorthodox measures? Why not simply report these establishments to civil rights authorities? Because traditional reporting mechanisms place the burden on victims while treating each incident as isolated, Marcus explained. Our approach demonstrates that these aren't isolated incidents, but systematic patterns requiring systematic solutions. The questioning continued for hours, alternating between hostile interrogation from Whitman's allies and thoughtful engagement from those genuinely concerned about both corporate power and social inequality. As the hearing neared its conclusion, Congressman Foster tried one final line of attack. Mr. Johnson, isn't it true that your actions against Goldleaf Restaurant and Whitman Development were essentially acts of revenge for your personal treatment? Marcus paused, considering his answer carefully. When I walked into Goldleaf Restaurant in jeans and a t-shirt, I was told, "We don't serve people like you here." That statement wasn't just about me. It was about every person who has ever been judged by appearance rather than character. He looked directly at the chairman. My response wasn't revenge, Congressman. It was transformation. Goldleaf now has a diverse staff, an African-American executive chef, and inclusive hiring practices. The buildings once used to displace residents now provide stable, affordable housing. The community center that was scheduled for demolition now offers technology education to the next generation of innovators. Marcus leaned forward slightly. This isn't about personal grievances. It's about creating systems where dignity isn't determined by dress code or net worth. In the gallery, Stella wiped away tears as Andre reached over to squeeze her hand in solidarity. Amara watched with quiet pride as her boss and friend spoke truth to power. Foster, visibly frustrated by Marcus's composed and compelling testimony, finally adjourned the hearing. As Marcus gathered his materials, Whitman approached the witness table. "Impressive performance," the developer said with forced casualness, "but this little crusade of yours won't change anything in the long run. Development will continue. The market always wins." Marcus stood to face him directly. "You're right about one thing, Richard. The market does win, but markets change when the rules change." He gestured around the packed chamber. "And the rules are changing." As Marcus exited the hearing room, a crowd of reporters swarmed around him, shouting questions. He stopped briefly to make a single statement. Today's conversation isn't about one restaurant, one development project, or one individual's experience. It's about recognizing that true security, the kind my company has always stood for, requires dignity, equity, and opportunity for all. That's not charity or activism. It's simply good business and better humanity. In the car afterward, Amara showed him the initial coverage on her tablet. "You're trending nationwide. The documentary release is scheduled for tonight?" Marcus nodded. "Perfect timing. From Chicago to Congress to the country." "The fight's not over," Amara cautioned. "Whitman still has powerful allies." "It was never going to be just one battle," Marcus agreed. "But today, we changed the terrain on which all future battles will be fought." As their car moved through Washington, D.C. toward the airport, Marcus received a text from Mayor Williams. "Watching the hearing. Impressive testimony. Full funding approved for Chicago Hospitality Standards Initiative. When can you start?" Marcus smiled. The ripples continued to spread. 3 months after the congressional hearing, Marcus stood in the newly renovated Gold Leaf restaurant. The space had been transformed, not just physically but fundamentally. Gone were the stuffy portraits of historical businessmen. In their place hung vibrant artwork from local Chicago artists representing the city's diverse communities. The staff now reflected that same diversity, moving with confidence through the bustling dinner service. Andre approached, wearing his executive chef's whites with quiet pride. "What do you think of the new menu?" he asked. Marcus smiled, setting down the innovative fusion dish that blended Andre's French culinary training with elements from his Southern family recipes. "Brilliant. The critics were right to call it revolutionary." Andre gestured toward a nearby table. "She's here again." Stella sat with a group of community organizers, deep in animated discussion. After joining Cypher Security's community relations team, she had become a powerful advocate for the foundation's housing initiatives. Her first-hand experience with displacement made her uniquely effective at building bridges between corporate interests and community needs. "Third meeting this week," Marcus observed. "How's the tenant rights legislation looking?" "Moving forward," Andre confirmed. "They've got support from 6 aldermen now." Stella's testimony at the city council made a difference. The restaurant was hosting a special event, the launch of a new scholarship program for South Chicago youth, funded by proceeds from the documentary that had now been viewed by millions. The film had transformed public discourse about discrimination and economic development nationwide. At the center of the restaurant stood a scale model of the renovated community center, now expanded with new technology labs and art spaces. Children and parents circulated around it, faces bright with possibility. Mayor Williams approached, offering his hand. "The program's a success already. Applications are double what we projected. Communities respond when given real opportunities," Marcus replied. "And real representation," the mayor added, nodding toward the center's new board of directors, all local residents now empowered with both resources and decision-making authority. As the evening progressed, Marcus found a quiet moment alone, standing by the window where Richard Whitman had once sat in privilege. The developer's influence had waned significantly after the congressional hearing, especially when the Attorney General's investigation into his business practices had resulted in substantial settlements with former tenants. Whitman Development still existed, but under new leadership and with binding community benefit agreements attached to all future projects. Systems changing, one decision at a time. Phillips, the former owner of Gold Leaf, approached cautiously. "Mr. Johnson, I wanted to thank you personally. When you first changed our lease terms, I thought you were destroying my business. I was wrong." He gestured around the packed restaurant. "We've never been more successful." "Sometimes transformation looks like destruction at first," Marcus replied, "but only to those who benefit from the status quo." As Phillips moved away, Amara joined Marcus by the window. "Quite a journey these past few months." "Just the beginning," Marcus said, watching the diverse crowd of diners, community members, and civic leaders mingling freely. "The real work is ensuring these changes outlast any individual effort." Amara smiled knowingly. "Which is why you're launching the Equitable Cities Initiative next month." "Systems change requires sustained pressure at multiple points," Marcus confirmed. Chicago was just the prototype. Outside the restaurant window, the city skyline glittered with possibility. Inside, people who would never have broken bread together 3 months ago now shared tables, ideas, and visions for a different kind of urban future. The transformation wasn't perfect or complete. No real change ever is. But it was undeniably in motion, rippling outward from a single moment when a billionaire in jeans and a t-shirt had been told, "We don't serve people like you here," and had replied, in word and deed, "Then we must become people who serve everyone." 1 year after Marcus's initial visit to Gold Leaf Restaurant, he returned on a snowy Chicago morning. This time, he wore his usual business attire, a tailored suit and polished shoes. He didn't need the disguise anymore. The experiment had evolved into a movement. The hostess greeted him with genuine warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson. Your usual table is ready." His usual was now in the main dining room, not hidden by the kitchen doors. As he settled in, he noticed a familiar face at a nearby table. Richard Whitman. The developer looked different somehow. The arrogant confidence had been replaced by something more contemplative. When he noticed Marcus, he hesitated before approaching. "May I join you briefly?" Whitman asked, his tone lacking its former condescension. Marcus gestured to the chair across from him. "Of course." Whitman sat, clearly uncomfortable. "I never thought I'd say this, but I owe you an acknowledgement. Maybe even gratitude." Marcus raised an eyebrow, waiting. "When you first interfered with my projects, I was furious." Whitman continued. "I was certain you were destroying everything I'd built, but the community benefit agreements you forced on us, they've actually created better developments." He pulled out his phone, showing Marcus renderings of a new project. "This is our South Side mixed-income housing development, designed with actual community input. 30% affordable units, small business incubator spaces, daycare facilities." Marcus studied the images with interest. "Impressive evolution in your business model." "It's still profitable," Whitman admitted. "Just differently profitable. Longer-term returns, more stable tenancies, better community relations." He put away his phone. "My board was skeptical initially, but the data is compelling." "Data usually is," Marcus agreed, "when we're willing to see it." Whitman hesitated before adding, "The congressional hearing was a wake-up call. So was the Attorney General's investigation. But what really changed my thinking was watching my own daughter's reaction to your documentary. She asked me questions I couldn't answer." This personal admission surprised Marcus. "How old is your daughter?" 19, freshman at Northwestern, social justice major." Whitman smiled ruefully. "She refused to speak to me for weeks after the hearing, said she wouldn't come home until I became part of the solution instead of the problem." "Powerful motivation," Marcus observed. "More powerful than any business incentive," Whitman agreed. He stood to leave. "I'm not asking for friendship, Johnson. Too much has happened. But I thought you should know that sometimes your opponents can become your strongest case studies." As Whitman departed, Stella arrived with a pot of coffee. She had maintained her role at Cipher Securities, but often helped at Goldleaf during their quarterly community stakeholder breakfasts. "Was that Whitman?" she asked, watching the developer's retreating figure. "It was," Marcus confirmed, "showing me his new community-centered development models." Stella shook her head in amazement. "Never thought I'd see that day." She poured his coffee. "The committee's waiting in the private room when you're ready." The committee she referred to was the Chicago Equitable Development Commission, a new public-private partnership that had grown from the Hospitality Standards Initiative. It now reviewed major development projects throughout the city, ensuring community benefits and displacement protections. Marcus finished his coffee before joining them. The commission members represented a cross-section of Chicago: neighborhood leaders, business owners, policy experts, and ordinary citizens who had experienced displacement. This diverse group now reviewed every major development project in the city, ensuring that growth benefited all communities equally. As Marcus entered the private dining room, conversations paused briefly before resuming with renewed energy. He took his seat not at the head of the table but alongside the others, his billions giving him no special privilege in this space. "Let's continue," said Commissioner Daniela Rodriguez, a former housing advocate who now chaired the committee. "We were discussing the expansion of the model to other neighborhoods." For the next 2 hours, Marcus mostly listened as the commission debated the successes and challenges of their first year. The hospitality standards had been implemented in over 200 Chicago establishments. Housing protections had been extended to 15 previously vulnerable neighborhoods. The community center had doubled its enrollment in technology programs. But challenges remained. Some business owners resisted the new requirements. Certain developers sought loopholes. The work of transformation was never finished. As the meeting concluded, Andre arrived with lunch for the group, a spread that showcased his innovative fusion cuisine while remaining accessible to diverse palates. The chef had become a minor celebrity in Chicago's culinary scene, his success opening doors for other talented black chefs previously denied opportunities. "How's the restaurant doing?" Marcus asked him as the commissioners enjoyed the meal. "Booked solid through summer," Andre replied with quiet pride. "And our apprenticeship program has 32 students now, mostly from South and West Side neighborhoods." Marcus nodded approvingly. This had been part of Gold Leaf's transformation, a formal training program that created pathways into fine dining for young people from communities typically excluded from such careers. After the commissioners departed, Marcus remained behind with Amara and Stella to discuss next steps for the foundation's work. "The documentary has been requested by 23 other city governments," Amara reported. "They want to implement similar programs. And our data shows measurable impacts," Stella added, reviewing figures on her tablet. "Employment diversity in participating restaurants up 67%. Customer satisfaction increased 22%. Even profits are up 18% on average. Good business and better humanity." Marcus quoted his own congressional testimony. "The numbers support what we've always known. Inclusion isn't just ethical, it's economically sound." As they concluded their meeting, Marcus's phone buzzed with a notification from the mayor's office. The city council had unanimously approved the expansion of their initiative to include retail establishments and entertainment venues. Another ripple, spreading further. On the second anniversary of his first visit to Gold Leaf, Marcus decided to recreate the experiment one final time. He donned jeans, a simple t-shirt, and worn sneakers. No watch, no phone, nothing to identify him as anything other than an ordinary man seeking breakfast. But this time, he wouldn't be visiting Gold Leaf. Instead, he entered a small diner in a neighborhood where gentrification was just beginning to creep in, the leading edge of the next wave of displacement if nothing changed. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. An older waitress named Gloria, according to her name tag, looked up from behind the counter. "Seat yourself, hon," she called out cheerfully. "Coffee's fresh." Marcus chose a booth by the window and observed the morning rhythm of the place. Workers grabbing breakfast before shifts. Elderly residents nursing coffee cups for hours. The diner serving as their social center. A young mother trying to keep 2 small children entertained over pancakes. When Gloria approached his table, her smile was genuine. "What can I get you this morning?" "Just coffee for now, thank you," Marcus replied. She returned promptly with a steaming mug. "Take your time with the menu. No rush here." As Marcus sipped his coffee, the door opened again. To his surprise, Stella entered, immediately spotting him despite his casual attire. After 2 years working together, she knew him too well to be fooled by the disguise. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, sliding into the booth across from him. "How did you know I'd be here?" Stella smiled. "Amara mentioned you were evaluating new locations. Wasn't hard to figure out what that meant today of all days." Gloria returned to take their orders. As she walked away, Stella looked around the diner with a professional eye. "So, this is the next project?" "Potentially," Marcus nodded. "This entire block is under consideration for a new Whitman project. Mixed-use development." "The new Whitman or the old Whitman?" Stella asked skeptically. "That's what I'm here to determine," Marcus replied. "They've submitted all the right paperwork to the commission. Community benefits agreement looks solid, but I wanted to see this place myself before it potentially disappears." Their food arrived, simple but well-prepared breakfast plates. Gloria refilled their coffee cups without being asked, chatting briefly about the neighborhood, unaware of who her customers were or the significance of their visit. As they ate, Marcus and Stella discussed the changes of the past 2 years. The documentary had won awards and influenced policy discussions nationwide. The Chicago model was being adapted in cities across the country. Marcus had testified before 3 more congressional committees on equitable development and technological access. But most importantly, lives had changed. Andre had opened a second restaurant focused on training young chefs from underserved communities. The community center had launched 12 tech startups founded by South Chicago residents. Stella had been promoted to Director of Community Relations at Cipher Securities, overseeing initiatives that had helped hundreds of families maintain stable housing. When they finished eating, Marcus requested the check. Gloria brought it promptly, thanking them for coming. Marcus looked at the modest total, $18.75 for both meals, and thought about the contrast with his $127 breakfast at Gold Leaf 2 years earlier. He inserted his credit card, not the Obsidian Reserve this time, but a standard card, into the reader and added a $500 tip. Gloria's eyes widened when she saw the amount. "Sir, there must be some mistake." "No mistake," Marcus assured her. "Just appreciation for good service freely given to all." Still looking shocked, Gloria processed the payment with trembling hands. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "Just 2 questions," Marcus said gently. "How long have you worked here?" 27 years, Gloria replied. "Started when my kids were little, put them both through college from tips and extra shifts. And what would you do if this place closed? There's talk of new development on this block." Gloria's expression fell. "I've been hearing those rumors. At my age, starting over somewhere new would be—" She shook her head. "This place is home. These customers are family." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, exchanging a glance with Stella. They thanked Gloria again and departed, walking slowly down the block. "What are you thinking?" Stella asked. "I'm thinking it's time for the next evolution of our work," Marcus replied. "Not just protecting existing community anchors, but creating new ownership models entirely. Employee ownership," Stella suggested. "The foundation could facilitate the transition, provide training on business management." Marcus smiled. "Exactly. Places like that diner aren't just businesses. They're community institutions. Their value can't be measured solely in profit margins." They reached his car, where Amara waited with their day's schedule. Before getting in, Marcus looked back at the diner, at Gloria visible through the window serving her next customers with the same genuine care she had shown them. "The greatest security we can provide isn't just in code or buildings or policies," he said quietly. "It's in creating systems where people know their dignity isn't dependent on their dress, or their wealth, or their appearance." "From one restaurant experiment to a national movement," Stella marveled. "I still can't believe how much has changed." "And how much hasn't?" Marcus reminded her. "This work is generational. We've only just begun." As they drove away, Marcus thought about the difference between his first Gold Leaf receipt, with its expensive total and reluctant service, and today's modest check delivered with genuine humanity. The contrast crystallized everything their work had been about. In the end, it wasn't just about who was served or how much they paid. It was about creating a world where everyone could both serve and be served with dignity, where economic security and human dignity reinforced rather than undermined each other. The most valuable receipt from this 2-year journey wasn't the paper one in his pocket. It was the receipt of transformation, evidence that systems could change when enough people committed to changing them. Not overnight, not without resistance, but steadily, measurably, irrevocably. And with each small victory, each life improved, each barrier removed, the possibilities expanded for what could come next. The experiment that had begun with a billionaire in jeans being told, "We don't serve people like you here," had evolved into a movement that was transforming the very definition of service, security, and community. The true receipt was the world they were building, transaction by transaction, decision by decision, day by day. A world where no one would ever again be told they weren't the kind of person who belonged.